Welcome to another edition of RCE. Again, this is Brock Palen. You can find us online at rce-cast.com. You can find our entire back catalog there, as well as links to Jeff's blog and our Twitter accounts and other ways you can get a hold of us. So send us show recommendations or any other comments you could possibly have. Also, we are into supercomputer season, so Jeff and myself will be there, and Jeff is also on the line. Jeff, thanks a lot for your time.
Hey, Brock. Yeah, today, actually, I think we should mention this is going to be after the fact, but it's a special spooky edition of RCE Cast because we're recording on Halloween. I mean, this won't go live till after the fact, but just know that there are ghosts and goblins floating around as we are recording.
Yes, it is the holiday season. Actually, on the way down to where I record this, I ran into the dean of our College of Engineering here at the University of Michigan, and he was dressed up as a gigantic ear of corn.
Outstanding.
Yes.
Because when I think Michigan, I think corn.
Right. So our guest today, I'll give her an opportunity to introduce herself, but she is Boyana Norris. Boyana, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Boyana Norris. I am a faculty member at the Computer and Information Science Department at the University of Oregon. I'm very fresh here. I just joined after 13 years as a research scientist at the Math and Computer Science Division at Argonne National Lab near Chicago.
Cool. And we are going to be talking to Boyana about her project today called Orio. Now, I wonder if you could tell us what Orio is and how you got the name, because when I search for Orio, I find the obvious cookie references, and I also find that Google helpfully tells me that it's a city in Spain. So what is your definition of Orio?
So I didn't know about the city in Spain, but when we were looking for a name for our new research project, we wanted something that had to do with performance. And so we searched a lot of languages and dictionaries online, and finally, a very obscure word in Greek contains Orio as part of that word, and it's the word for speed limit. I can't pronounce the whole thing. And because it also sounds like the cookie, we thought that would be a very good idea for a new tool name. So, but it is spelled O-R-I-O.
So, what exactly is Orio? What's the elevator pitch?
Orio basically is a framework that allows people to do a couple of different things. So you can both define new experimental little languages to express some computation that may be, in your specific domain. So you could, instead of starting with C, C++, you can come up with new representations of your problem. So it allows you to do that. And also, assuming you don't want to define a new language, it also lets you generate code that's optimized for different architectures. And what we do is we try to target most of the architectures that are of interest to high-performance computing, including, CPUs, multi-core CPUs, GPUs, and some new things we're working on, also with many cores and FPGAs. They're not ready yet, but we always try to think of new code targets. So you could use it in several different ways, but typically people use it to optimize the performance for a particular architecture.
Now, how did you get started on this? Because that sounds like a pretty wide-scale project. I mean, it fits under the lumping of performance optimization and performance improvement, but you touched on a lot of different things there. How did this get started as a project?
Yeah, it actually it was inspired. It started out of sheer frustration. So Bill Gropp, who is currently a Thomas Siebel Chair in Computer Science at UIUC, he back at Argonne when he was working with me in 2006, expressed the desire to come up with a way to specify different optimizations that you could do on your own code. So suppose you implemented something in C, you write your loops and you know exactly how they could be optimized. Well, and the compiler doesn't do it, right? For some reason. And he wanted to actually be able to explicitly force certain optimizations. So that was the first goal we had, was to express what can be done on a piece of code in a way that lets us automate it. So it was not very complicated. I mean, it was basically here, unroll these loops, or do a few other things that compilers typically should be able to do, but maybe don't.
I should point out we've actually had Dr. Gropp on the show before, and he's a friend of the show, so that's it's kind of cool. We're going full circle on this. So, define your own language. What would you see as the benefit of telling a graduate student or a researcher to go define your own language, which we will then turn into something that a compiler can turn into machine code?
Yeah, that's a great question. What the current languages people use mostly for their HPC projects, which is usually C, C++, Fortran. I mean, they definitely allow you to express all your computations, obviously. But sometimes, in order to optimize something more fully, if you knew, for example, that you're working with matrices, you could actually employ what you learned in linear algebra and perform some matrix transformations before you have loops. So that's one high-level example of where you may want to give the compiler or the tool some extra information about the objects you're working with. And this is where, in different domains, you may not have a matrix, but you may have some other higher level description of what it is you're doing that could potentially enable some transformations that aren't possible at the level of C or Fortran.
So then, what do we define the language in? Is it like a normal parser generator? Or, I don't know if I'm using the right word. Does it have its own, or is it something we've all seen before, or something like that?
Okay, so there's a couple of choices. So Orio already has a few. So it doesn't have to be really a domain language. So it already supports a few types of inputs, right? But if you wanted to add a new one, yes, you'd have to write your own little parser. One of the philosophies behind the tool was to have as little baggage as possible. So it's actually all in Python. And we use the Ply parser generator tool. And so it's actually fairly trivial to define your parser. You do have to know how to do that. The reason it's a little bit easier than some real compiler projects is exactly that we're sticking to Python and very, very simple tools for expressing your syntax and implementing the parser.
So that's actually, you kind of hit on my exact upcoming question here, was how does this compare to something like the Clang compiler, which, prides itself in being able to, you can put all kinds of hooks all over the place and do all kinds of transformation of once the software has been parsed and so on, and you can directly manipulate the data structures for the emitted code and things like that. How does this compare?
This framework is a lot simpler and a lot more open, and so you could basically put your own modules at any point. So, like we mentioned, you can do your new language, for example. Which, if you take projects like Clang, they limit their input languages, right, to say C and C++, and so we let people specify new syntax more easily, I think. Now, that could be a pretty subjective opinion, but than if you were using a real compiler toolkit. That is not to say that you couldn't do it, in one of those larger infrastructures, but we believe that enabling rapid prototyping here is one of the main goals, so that you can make a decision whether pursuing a certain type of language or a certain type of transformation is really worth your time. So get results quickly in order to decide whether what you're thinking actually makes sense.
So Jeff mentioned Clang, but we also had on the show the Chapel language from Cray, and they are like this intermediate language, compile or run a parser to generate then, I think they were using C or C++ to then feed